welcome to Behind the Returns. This is your host Arun, and I head the mutual fund research at Funds India. As always, we have yet another super interesting guest with us. We have Mr. Pankaj Tibrewal, who's a mid and small cap specialist at Kotak Mutual Fund. He handles both their mid cap fund, which is Kotak Emerging Equities, and also their small cap fund, which is Kotak Small Cap Fund. Hi, Pankaj. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi Arun, it's great to be on your platform and on your show.
Sure. So, Pankaj, just wanted to start off with probably a little bit of a weird question. So, you would normally have mandates to outperform benchmark. So, hypothetically, let's assume we gave you a mandate that you'll have to dramatically underperform the benchmark over the next 5 to 10 years. How would you go about building a framework or philosophy to address this kind of a portfolio construction? How would you choose stocks to underperform the benchmark over the long run?
That should not be the endeavor, but it's a very interesting question. For the first time, somebody is asking me that how should we look to underperform? So that comes to my favorite book, which probably is, I think, a Bible for anybody in the investment world to read. The book is called All I Want to Know Where I'm Going to Die, so I will never go there. And the book is all about theory of inversion, that what all things which you will do, which you will not do, probably in your investment career, or minimize the mistake, so that over a longer term, the returns are sustainable, your performance is sustainable. So I think all those things which are probably in theory of inversion will probably lie in your answer. So let's try and see that what are the things probably which we avoid, probably making sure that the long-term returns are sustainable and are not a very short-term fluke kind of a thing, is the answer to your question. So probably things probably we should not attempt to do. One is that we avoid companies with leverage. And I think X Financial, if you look at over longer periods of time, leverage cuts both ways. And companies which have very high leverage over a cycle, and cycles have become shorter, as you have seen, even in COVID-19, we had a very sharp cut for a very brief period. But what damage it could do if you have a very high leverage could be very devastating. So I think one clear no is that you should not own companies with very high leverage, X Financials. The second, I think, is the most important part is capital allocation. And time and again, we have seen that companies which have not generated shareholder value over a longer periods or long-term value are companies which have generated return on capital or return on equity lower than the cost of equity. And if you consistently do that over a period of time, you actually destroy value rather than creating value for shareholders. And I think that's something which is very close to our heart while doing stock selection. And time and again, we have seen that companies for a brief period, if they move above cost of capital but can't sustain that, for example, commodity companies, look at, most of the commodity companies, they haven't created value in the last 15, 20 years, over a cycle. Momentarily, they may look exciting, but most of the commodity companies have generated return on equity or capital, which is below the cost of equity for a longer period. So I think capital allocation and return on capital is very important. The third important part is the promoter track record. And by that, we mean that managements and promoters who have demonstrated high levels of integrity in the past. If you try and compromise, I think leopards don't change their stripes. And for a very short period, they may look genuine guys, but if it's not in their character, it will come out somewhere or the other in the medium to long term. And I think it's very important in that aspect to look at the past of what the promoter's history and track record has been and to take clue from them. So I think if you look at these three important aspects, and apart from that, I think balance sheet and cash flow more than the P&L. And I have always believed that top line is vanity, bottom line is sanity, and cash in bank is reality. There's no point chasing companies which only demonstrate top line if it doesn't convert into profits. There's no reason of owning a company which only shows accounting profit but doesn't convert into cash flows. So hence, cash flow is the real thing. And we believe that balance sheet and cash flows display a lot of truth, gives a lot of insights into the company and how strong the moat of that company is. So when you combine these 4 5 things, if you maintain that discipline, I think the risk minimization or mistake minimization comes down drastically. And I think if you invert that and you want a portfolio, just do the opposite of owning companies which doesn't generate cash flow, which doesn't have a great balance sheet, which are leveraged, and which are generating return on capital lower than the cost of capital. And I'm sure over the next 5 10 years, you will be among the worst performing.
Right, sure. So in essence, basically, if we invert this process, we'll eventually get to your investment philosophy.
Absolutely.
So just yet another hypothetical question. So let's assume you were given a task of translating your entire investment philosophy into a quant framework, and you had to train an algorithm to, let's say, run your fund for the next 5 years. So how do you try to build or convert your investment philosophy into a quant framework, and which are the areas you think might be a lot more subjective and you might find it difficult, and which are the areas you think will be like more or less easy to become more process oriented, or rather is currently already process oriented?
So I think, few things probably I will touch the subjective element. I think in India, when you are operating in a large space called mid and small cap, there are shades of gray in assessing the management quality. And I think any algorithm, anything probably won't be able to kind of throw a number on whether this management is great or not great. That over a period of time of what they have done in the past will throw you the answer, right? So I think that's a little subjective, and the way we approach that is through our channel checks, through speaking to the ecosystem, through the suppliers, customers, vendors, employees, and so on and so forth. And you get a fair bit of sense on the integrity and the overall behavior of the promoter to different parts of that ecosystem. So that's a little subjective. We trying to bring some framework to it. But as of now, if you ask me, can you put an algo to it? Answer is no, right? But look at the things where we can probably, which are part of our process. And if you want to run an algo, probably we can, easily do it. One is, I believe that India has always rewarded growth, and growth which has been more sustainable in nature. And companies which have, kind of created huge value in the last 20, 25 years in the country, I think have been companies which have probably managed the growth path irrespective of the cycles. And after every cycle, they have become stronger. So I think it's very important to see the last 5, 10, 15 years of the track record of that company, whether they have been able to beat the nominal GDP growth in terms of revenue and in terms of overall profitability. Second, I think is most important is coming to my point on return on capital again. Whether consistently over last 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 years, has the company able to generate return on capital, which is higher than the cost of capital, maybe 15, 17, 18, 19%. And if they can do that, what that will demonstrate that there is some competitive advantage or some competitive moat which the company is having. It could be in terms of product, it could be in terms of R&D, it comes of distribution, it could be in terms of brand franchise, it could be in terms of networking effect. There could be various competitive advantage or moat which the company may be having, and that can only be demonstrated when the company is generating return on capital, which is higher than the cost of capital. So that's something which you can, easily put it in the algo side. The third point, I think, is the cash flow conversion. And time and again, we have seen that companies which have been able to generate cash flow post working capital and the conversion of either PAT to EBITDA into the cash flow from operations post working is much higher. They are able to sustain their growth path even if they go for a capex, because the internal accruals will be sufficient enough to fund their growth, which in terms means capex in their own business. So I think we looked at cash flow conversion very, very closely. And again, that's a quantitative thing where you can again put it that in the algo. The fourth is probably the opportunity size and the market share. Is it a small fish in a large pond or a large fish in a small pond? I think we get excited by companies where the growth opportunity is huge. And there you can plot the market share of that company, both within organized as well as the entire universe where the company is operating in. And that will give you a fair bit of idea that what is the growth runway this company is chasing, and can the growth be there for next 5, 7, 10 years. And I think when you combine all these things together and put it in a framework, probably which we follow into, say, algorithm, I think you will get a desired outcome, probably which probably we all want, which is outperformance of a company and the stock.
Right. So, Pankaj, as you were mentioning, obviously you will need to balance it out across obviously a good business, and then you need strong growth, as you were mentioning, and obviously management, which is a gray area where you use subjective analysis to figure out which one would suit your particular portfolio. Then the final piece is the valuation. Now, obviously, the valuation is where there is immense subjectivity involved. So, in that sense, how do you, because once you get all these three in place, usually the assumption is that the valuations might also be factoring these three. So, in terms of when you buy companies, where do you, obviously, you will be buying at slightly lower valuations than your perceived intrinsic value for the company. Where do you think the market is missing, especially whenever you buy a company? Where do you think usually the market misprices? Is it because of the business or is it because of management? Why do you get mispricing despite the fact that there are so many fund managers, there's so many people tracking mid and small caps? So how do you think the mispricing actually happens?
Yeah, a very great question, Arun. I think over a period of time, I think everybody is learning, right? And what has been my mistakes, I think that will answer a part of your question. Few of my mistakes have been that I have been able to identify stocks very early on in the cycle, but probably very early on after making 2x, 3x, 4x, probably I sold off those holdings and they went in to become another 5x, 10x, 15x, you know, and that probably is a very big mistake in my view. And when you reflect back and ask yourself what mistake you did, there were two mistakes. One, probably we couldn't visualize the long runway or the sustainability of the growth which the company demonstrated. So one of the largest two-wheeler guys who created a maximum value, probably we couldn't fathom that or we couldn't visualize that in India, people will buy say 2 lakh, 2.5 lakh motorbike, right? But now 8 lakh motorbikes are being sold by that company. And when you kind of moved out of that position, the company was selling 2.5, 3 lakhs. And we said, wow. And we mapped it with the income taxpayers in the country, how many people can afford a 2.5, 3 lakh bike. And the answer was that probably they are reaching peak, you know, but they went on to have 3x, 4x multiplications from there on. So I think we kind of misread the growth trajectory and the sustainability of that growth. One. The second, I think the most important lesson is that yes, valuations are important, but I think one thing which I have learned is that growth is the horse and valuation is the cart. Normally, most of the people try to reverse that and saying valuation is the horse and growth is the cart, but no. We have seen time and again that companies which keep on giving growth of maybe 15, 20% over longer periods of time, they never become cheap. You know, look at some of the paint companies, some of the consumer companies, consumer discretionary companies, over sustainable CAGR, if you can, kind of generate 15, 20% CAGR kind of a growth, I think markets love that. And probably growth is the horse and valuation is the cart. So I think these two things are very, very important, which probably I have learned very early on by making mistakes. And I think if one follows that, I think in your framework of four things which you mentioned, good business, good management, good financials growth, and fourth is the valuation. I think if three are good and you have a visibility of growth, valuation should not be the only parameter to go and sell. The moment you recognize that probably growth is peaking out and there's very limited scope of market share gain for the company, then you have to review that thesis that are we paying a very high price for the kind the growth will generate. And we have seen time and again, the companies always go through a life cycle, right? So there will be scale benefits which starts coming in for next 5, 7, 10 years. And beyond the point, then competition comes in because they are generating very high return on capital. They try to disrupt it. And for a few years, the company kind of, struggles with the growth path. And in that interim, the valuations kind of derate significantly. I think that is the point we need to take a call that growth is vanishing for medium term. The company will kind of struggle to generate growth, which they have done in the last 10, 15 years. And hence it is a time to review. So I think seldom you find all the 4 box ticking at one go. And that is the time when crisis comes in, during crisis, and for a very short period, 6 months back, we got that opportunity in the month of March where there was huge pessimism. But when you did a DCF of a good quality non-leveraged company, you saw that even if 1 year profits go down by 50, 60%, the long-term intrinsic value of that company doesn't change by more than 7, 8%. And that was the time to go and buy these good quality companies because valuation was in favor. Growth from a medium term looked okay. Managements are fine. And there's a long runway for growth from a longer term perspective as well. So I think during periods of crisis, you get a tick mark at all the boxes. But as a fund manager, I would love to get all the tick marks, but rarely it happens. But I think one should keep an eye on the growth. And I normally look at PEG, which is what price you are paying for the unit of growth. And if companies are growing at 20, 25%, even if the P is at 20, 25 times, I don't mind that clearly. So I think growth is a very important. And as I said, growth is the horse, valuation is the cart.
Sure. So Pankaj, as you were mentioning that because growth becomes the core center stage of your entire investment philosophy, at a time like this where probably the near term really kind of looks a little iffy in terms of what's the future going to look like for a lot of companies, where there might be few business models which need to change. So how do you look at growth at the current juncture in terms of your current portfolio construct, and how does the whole investment philosophy help you think through a scenario like this, and how does it reflect into your portfolio thinking today?
A great question again, Arun. I think the way, I look at companies is that I look at their past. And if you go into the history 10, 15, 20 years, you will find that every crisis makes a good company stronger and they emerge out much stronger post-crisis. And we have seen that time and again, not only in India, globally as well, right? Look at Amazon, what it was. From 97 and in the tech bubble, they lost almost 90% of their market cap, right? And how strong they emerged in the next 20, 25 years is something which we all are seeing in front of our eyes, right? So I think it's very important to understand what horse you are riding on. Is the management capable enough to use the crisis as an opportunity, right? You'll be very surprised. I was looking at the recent transcript of a company called Nike, right? And the opening remarks, the CEO says that we are using this crisis as an opportunity. We are on the offense. We have launched the maximum number of new products in the last 6 months. We have expanded distribution. We have done a lot to our online platform because consumers are more coming online rather than brick and mortar stores. And we need to have a front end which is extremely strong. And he clearly says that when other companies are fighting for survival, we think that there's an opportunity for us to think differently and think from next 5, 10 year perspective rather than next 3 to 6 months perspective, because our balance sheets, kind of supports us or our cash flow supports us. So I think this is the biggest differentiation between a company which is mediocre and a company which is good and great. That during the time of crisis, they are not very defensive. They are offensive actually. And they use those opportunities either in M&As or tightening their nut bolts, tightening their cost structures, looking at different opportunities in product distribution. So I think this is something which we analyze very closely, that when you look at the history of the company, there would have been cycles. And after a crisis, you ask, how did the company behave and how strong it emerged? And I think in my portfolios, I did this analysis that post 2008-9, how many investee companies which had the same management came out stronger post crisis in terms of growth. And I was surprised, about 75-80% of my companies which had the same management at the time of crisis in 2008-9 generated 15-20% CAGR growth for the next 3 years after the crisis. That means they did something right in the crisis. So I think that's very, very important to kind of understand. Second is, I think most of the market, I think, is kind of very short-term oriented. 1 quarter, 2 quarter, looking at quarterly and kind of expressing their views on a quarterly or 2 quarterly numbers. My sense is the biggest competitive edge as a fund manager I have is that I have a slightly longer term perspective. And we at Kotak generally don't, look at very quarterly numbers and take our investment calls. Yes, we keep a track on our investee companies on how they're performing on their balance sheet, cash flows, and quarterlies gives us a good indication. But till they are on the right track from a medium to long-term growth perspective, we are okay. Yeah, even if they miss 1 or 2 or 3 quarters kind of a number, or they consolidate their positioning. And I think that's something which is very important. I think I'm clearly seeing trends in COVID as well, that, stronger companies are getting stronger. There's a normal myth in the market that the companies rank between 100 to 650th. I'm taking the entire mid and small cap space, which are relevant, are the worst impacted during a time of crisis like COVID. But seldom people know that in this 550 companies, which is 100, 101 till 650, there are 200 companies which are category leaders in their own respect, in their own sectors. So a plywood company will be a small cap, but it is a leader in the space. A tile company will be, a pipe company will be a leader. So I think it's very important to understand, what is this crisis throwing? This crisis is throwing the opportunity that these companies will become larger and bigger. And because the tail in every sector is having a difficult time, because they are not getting working capital credit, they are struggling in terms of labor issues, they are struggling in terms of raw material availability, and hence the market share slowly is moving from unorganized or smaller players to the larger players. So I think, it really depends on the perspective one guy has from an investment horizon perspective. And I think if you have a slightly medium to long-term horizon, I think companies which you bang on and if they are strong companies will use those crises as an opportunity to grow post the crisis subside. And I'm fairly, optimist this time as well, that you will see value creation by a lot of companies which are leaders in their sector for the next 5-10 years once this pandemic subsides.
Sure. So Pankaj, also in terms of, obviously you will have a lot of debates going on inside. So what's the key debate that you guys are having internally in your fund management team?
So the debate is always, whether the market has run up too fast, too soon, whether the economy will catch up with the markets, which sectors, which companies probably would be outperforming going forward, which are the invested companies where we need to be careful about. Again, we don't try and see who will be the winners, but we try and be very careful that we don't have a lot of losers. And we believe that if you don't have a lot of losers and we don't compromise on your discipline over a period of time, you will be surprised at how compounding happens in your portfolio. And that's how, we have kind of managed it. And that be conscious about the fact that you make less and less mistake. Every day we come on the pitch, which is the market. You don't have to hit the ball out of the park. There will be days you need to take singles. There will be days you need to take 2 runs, but you need to be on the pitch for a longer period of time. and the scoreboard will keep on ticking, you know. So our job and our endeavor is that keep constantly looking at your investee companies and saying that are there disruption risk which is hitting this investee company? Is there something which is a corporate governance issue which is evolving? Is there a balance sheet cash flow issue which is evolving? And keep a very close scrutiny that you make less mistake and there's less, room for negative surprise error. And that's our, always a constant endeavor. And debate always is um, things which are going right. Probably we should carry it, write that stock, or we should book profits. Is the valuation become expensive? What is our growth forecast? And obviously macro always takes a center seat. What are the key things deteriorating or improving in the macro in India globally, whether it be interest rates, inflation, central bank policy, liquidity, all those are constant discussions. And obviously we have a morning meeting every day where we analysts, all of us come together. It's a religious one. And every day we discuss companies we have met in the previous couple of days. It's a great forum to kind of collaborate together to discuss, debate on various topics, and I think that's where the outcome you see across our funds.
Sure. So, Pankaj, also we've noticed that both from a domestic perspective and from a global perspective, almost all active funds at some point in time have their own phases of underperformance. Now, why do you think this happens? Can't there be hypothetically a fund which always outperforms? Why do you think underperformance becomes a necessary part of the journey for all good fund managers?
So it's a part of, I think, the cycle, so the great legend, Mr. Warren Buffett, right? Since 2000, since the tech bubble burst, he hasn't been able to beat S&P on a CAGR basis, right? Why? Because he had a certain way of investing, which worked in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Probably didn't work that well in the 2000s. So I always believe that if you are a fund manager who have outperformed for 15, 20, 25 years consistently, and you have seen 3 cycles and you have sustained yourself for 3 cycles. 3 cycles means boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. And you have sustained yourself for 3 cycles, you are GOD. You are really GOD, right? So because what happens is after every cycle, you would have made some mistake and you would become so cynical in life that you will miss the big trend coming up, right? And look at what happened in 2010 to 2019-20. You had the biggest bull run in the tech arena in US, right? And most of the old guys who have seen the tech bubble probably couldn't digest or couldn't forecast that platforms will grow so big, and they couldn't see the change, and hence many of them have underperformed massively compared to the benchmark. So I think it's very important to have an open mind, agility and flexibility over a period of time. And I think every individual, every fund manager will have a bias. For example, whatever I have spoken to you is a quality bias, right? That don't own companies which probably will, don't generate return on capital, right? Over cost of capital. There will be times and periods like 2007-8 where lower rung companies multiplied very fast. In that case, probably I will underperform, or we as a fund house will underperform, because our focus is growth at reasonable price and quality is the overarching principle of the framework, right? So there will be philosophies and processes which will probably not let that fund house deviate too much. And hence there will be cycles where if value does well, or probably some lower rung quality stock starts doing well, we will not go and compromise our short-term performance, that philosophy. But over a medium term, we are fairly okay that if that performance comes back again. But I completely agree that every active fund manager will go through. And as I said, alpha is cyclical. We have seen that in 2016-17. You go and look back, mid caps and small caps funds active underperform benchmark because you had a lot of lower rung stocks which did well. But once the crash happened and last 3 years, you have seen how alpha has come back. today the debate is going on between large cap funds and how they are probably underperforming Nifty. But I think the huge polarization we have seen in Nifty or Sensex is that we have not seen in the past. So top 10 stocks in Sensex are about 60%. So ideally it's not a Sensex 30, but a Sensex 10 or a Nifty 10, 60% of Nifty in just 10 stocks. So I think that at some point will change. It will can't going on forever, right? And that point, you will see active funds again coming back. And I always say alpha is cyclical. So you need to always understand that which phase of the cycle of the market you are in. And there will be bouts of underperformance. But if you don't change your discipline and style too much, I'm sure you will get back on the sustainable return path very fast. What we see in the companies that keep your course going, keep your basic discipline and philosophy which you have grown the company, keep intact. There will be times when competition will come in, they will hit you. But the way, few things which have been a part of DNA of your organization, don't change that. If you course change your style and philosophy too much over a period of time, I think you would probably get whipsawed both the sides, right? So I think it's very, very important to understand that part. And I think if you can always course correct yourself, keep analyzing, keep reflecting if you have made mistakes, but don't try and be just diagonally opposite. That, okay, this stock is running, this thing is running without conviction, without any, homework. You just join the momentum bandwagon. No, you will make mistakes, I think. So I think it's very important to hold on to your temperament, hold on to IQ. And I always say 95% return is IQ and EQ, and the 5% return is just IQ. Intelligent question is just 5%. The rest is 95% is emotion quotient. How you handle the cycle over a period of time demonstrate your returns over a longer periods of time.
So Pankaj, just extending the same thing forward. So obviously it means that at some point in time, your fund will also inevitably face the cyclicality of alpha, and there might be an underperformance. So for somebody who's invested in your fund, so how does he differentiate between underperformance due to, let's say, some style change or something really going wrong with the fund? Because the same underperformance can be due to the cyclicality or because of something structurally going wrong with the particular style, or maybe the fund manager has changed something. So how should a normal investor look at your portfolio and what should he check? Because at that point in time, obviously, all funds can underperform at some point. But how do we differentiate the nuances in underperformance?
So two things you can do. I think always people kind of try to look at point-to-point returns, right? And people try to see in last 1 year how the fund has done, probably 1.5, 2 years how the fund has done, 3 years how the fund. But what are we comparing is point-to-point return. I think seldom do people talk about rolling return among investor community. And if you try and analyze any fund on a rolling return basis, and you will get a lot of data points if you do a 3-year rolling, 4-year rolling, assuming the fund has an adequate history. And now there are many funds in India probably which have 15, 20-year track record, right? And you go into the history of that fund along with that fund manager and see on a rolling return basis, has the fund been able to generate alpha majority of the time? And is there a very short period because of which the fund has seen underperformance, right? So that is the first point we should take in, that on a rolling return basis, the picture or the conclusion which you may get could be very, very different from a point-to-point return. For example, in last 6 months, some heavyweights just went through the roof, for whatever reason, and you were underweight, and that probably will spill over to 1 year, 2 year, 3-year return very fast. So you may argue that no, the fund has underperformed. But if you do the rolling return, you would say that, okay, this 6 months was the only bad patch, but prior to that, the fund has demonstrated a very consistent approach of alpha generation, So I think that's one very good starting point for most investors and people like us to evaluate that. Is there something very short-term orientation, or is the fund perpetually underperforming for a longer periods of time? If the second is the case, I think you should get worried and ask further questions, right? But if first one is the question, obviously you should evaluate, but you should ask what's the reason. And to me, there could be various reasons. Let me give you my, explain you by my illustration, right? In the mid 2017, I clearly remember my Kotak Emerging Equity for 6 months underperformed massively, and because the index kept on moving very fast, because you had likes of all the kind of crap names you can think about, which are probably in penny numbers or penny pricing today after 3-4 years, but that time they were part of index and decent weights, right? And they were multiplying like nobody's game every day. And we refrained ourselves. We said, no, we don't believe in the business models. We don't trust the promoters, financials. Cash flows are not good. Balance sheet is screwed up. So we will probably avoid all these names. But we had to pay a price of underperformance, right? But we categorically communicated with our investors that this is something we will avoid and not touch. And we were, fortunate enough that after 6 months, kind of market crashed, and in next 3 to 4 months, whatever we lost, we got multiple of that back in alpha, and our case was vindicated. But if you plot that alpha generation on a rolling return on a graph, you will come to know for any fund whether that fund has some kind of a philosophy behind it, and is the underperformance for a very short period of time, and then you dwell into what has been the reason because of that, and then you go into looking at benchmark weights, what stock has done well in the benchmark, will you own this stock, is there a question of ethics out there, is a question of integrity in that company, will you own that company, or will you like your portfolio manager to own that company, so I think that those are the things. Then you go into, there may be some misses obviously, but I think once you do that analysis, I think a lot of clarity emerges that why the fund is underperforming, or is the underperformance for a short period or a longer period.
Sure. So coming to the last question, obviously a mid and small cap space is a very volatile space, and you've seen a year like 2013 where it was probably at nobody wanted to touch mid and small caps, and there's also a year like 17 where like everybody wanted only mid and small caps. So for any viewer who's watching the show, how should somebody identify the, I mean, obviously in retrospect, it's super easy for us to say 13 was cheap and 17 was expensive. So any, because you are there in the ring side, any tips or any particular factors which investors should keep monitoring so that they'll be able to get a flavor of, is the market too cheap or is it getting a little overboard?
So I think valuations is clearly one criteria where one should keep an eye. And if you are getting similar companies in large cap at a cheaper valuation or slight premium valuation to the same companies in mid cap which are representing that sector, one should ask the question that finally these large companies in the same sector are commanding say 22 times 1 year forward P, and this is a mid cap company in the same sector which 1/10 of the size of that large cap company is having a multiple of 24-25 times. Is it warranted? It could be if the smaller company has a better runway of growth than the larger company. But if the growth rate assuming equal, why would you pay a higher valuation and a price than compared to that large cap, which is much more resilient in a down cycle? So I think this is something which probably a relative evaluation in companies and sectors always gives you some kind, whether it's heating up too much or not. The second, I think, point always is cash flow yield. And I think that's something which is very important. And as I mentioned, as a philosophy, as a house, is not too much to look at P&L accounting profit. And I think it's more important to look at cash flow yields. And during downturns, we have seen that good quality companies are available at a free cash flow yield higher than the bond yield. And that's something which excites us a lot. And that's one very good indication that these companies are available cheap. These companies probably will throw up so much of cash that your entire investment in the next 5, 7, 10 years will become free. And these are growth oriented companies. So I think that's the second, another important approach probably one should take to understand whether there's undervaluation or overvaluation in this space. And the third, obviously, is the kind of growth opportunity. Is the growth, as I said, mentioned, is good enough for the next 5, 7 years for this company, which we are not able to forecast. For example, look at housing. The largest housing finance company has grown at 15-20% CAGR for 20-25 years. And just remind yourself, and you be in the 95-2000 era and say that this was the company identified, but could you visualize the growth runway for the next 15-20 years? And I think the real winners come out then. They will go through the bouts of overvaluation, undervaluation, but will you go and completely sell those high quality growth companies just because valuations have become too rich? I think so. When you combine all these things together, you probably start getting a fair bit of answer on whether the entire space is heated up or undervalued, and probably are companies available cheap, where that cash flows are strong, management is good. Cyclically, the company may be going through some trouble or some kind of a headwind, but over a period of time, the long-term intrinsic value of the company is still intact. So I think these are some of the things we kind of look into. And obviously then we look at price to book, that on a price to book, is the space very expensive compared to the relative other available names in the overall market? Is the sector only running on narrative, and the entire return has been because of PE expansion rather than earnings upgrade? That's another thing which we look at very closely. And in many cases, we have seen that 80% of the return has just come from PE expansion and no earnings upgrade. And then we get a little jittery that if the narrative changes the other way, the stock can derate also significantly if there's no execution finally on earnings, because finally stocks are slave of earnings, right? If there's no earning growth, the story can't last forever till eternity. So I think these are the few things which we kind of look into to make sure that we don't make mistakes in the cycle, just more from a cycle perspective. Like for example, last 1 year, the reason we have been shouting that broader market has the probability of doing well is because we saw that the large cap move was polarized between few stocks, and the broader market discount to large caps had become too large. So there were two possibilities: either large caps come down or mid cap starts, or the broader market start improving. The call worked very great till January, February. Then we had COVID, and for 2.5 months it got disturbed. But now look at the way mid caps and small caps have come back. Who would have imagined post-COVID such a sharp move in mid and small caps? And the reason is that the broader market was looking at an excuse for large caps to correct, and then mid caps now starting to follow. So I think these are some of the things which probably over a period of time, you kind of come with experience. Once you have seen few cycles, and then probably that you need to maintain your temperament at every cycle rather than just getting carried away by greed and fear,
Sure. Thank you so much, Pankaj, for all those insights, and really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure, Arun, and thank you for some very, very interesting and difficult questions. It made me thinking as well while I was answering your question. But whatever we have discussed, I think clearly is core to our philosophy at Kotak. Is clearly something which we practice every day, and what we probably kind of look forward every day, that we don't make too many mistakes, and we probably stay on the pitch for a longer period of time.
Sure, Pankaj. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Arun. Thanks.
Yeah.